Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
Friday, and all of today's guests, including Thomas Drance, standing by in Penticton. Brought to you by the Bayside Oceanfront Resort. Dive into West Coast luxury with oceanfront rooms, a seaside restaurant, and relax in their indoor and outdoor pools with free parking, on-site cafe, fitness center, and so much more. Your ultimate escape awaits. Book your stay today. Call 250-248-8333 or visit us at BaysideResortParksville.com. Canucks Young Stars Tournament begins today in Penticton, 4 o'clock. It's the Flames and the Jets at 7:30. Jonathan Lekaramaki and the Canucks against the Oilers of Edmonton. Thomas Drance is in Penticton. He joins us now from The Athletic. How are you, sir?
Gentlemen, it's nice to be back. Congratulations on another season. Thank you for having me again. I'm not sure why you subject your audience to this, but damn do I love being a part of it.
Oh, my gosh.
We say the same.
So nice to hear. Hopefully you won't get frozen today. Longtime viewers will know what I'm talking about.
I was frozen all summer, actually. I never unfroze as far as I can tell.
How was your summer? How was your summer? What did you get up to?
Well, I spent a lot of time rehabbing that ankle, but by late July, I was ready to go. Spent a lovely week up on Savory Island. Hung out and did Vancouver things. It was low key, but it was fabulous. It was restful, and all of that said, I'm excited. After this call, I'll head to the rink, cover a morning skate, and then I've got a double header this afternoon. Should be fun. The Penticton Young Stars Tournament, honestly, one of my favorite annual events, and not just because I'm up here by the lake in wine country.
Yeah, getting into the swing of things with hockey. So people who see that game today, the Canucks game, or tonight, in Penticton, what will they notice when they watch Jonathan Lekaramaki?
Well, look, this Canucks team is interesting in terms of how they've put this group together. And I think this is an important sort of thing to remember as you watch these games, right? Like Lekaramaki, first of all, it's going to be very interesting to see what he looks like. Had a historic season in the SHL, junior world champion MVP. For Team Sweden, but he also got that sort of cup of coffee in the American League down the stretch, and it's not like he blew the doors off. It's not like he looked, ready at that point in the spring to sort of challenge for an NHL job. Now, I know he's done a pretty aggressive summer of lifting, adding strength to his game, and he's being put in a position to succeed tonight, right? Like, he's going to be playing on a line with Arshdeep Bains, who's an American League All-Star, and Aatu Räty, who's spent 2 full professional seasons. He's played a handful of NHL games, as has Bains, and obviously went on a scoring tear down the stretch last year. Bains is a fabulous playmaker. Räty and Lekaramaki can both rip it. Expectations, given the maturity on that line, should be really high for Canucks fans. Like that line should be dominant. And you sort of look up and down this Canucks roster. Now it's a little different on defense, but certainly up front, you've got Max Sasson here, right? You've got Arshdeep Bains here. This isn't, a group of prospects. There's real young pros on this roster. And so, this Canucks team should be pretty competitive. They should be a really good, like one of the stronger teams at this tournament, in contrast to some extent with, the Calgary Flames, for example, who I think have 8 players here that they just drafted back in June in Vegas, right? I mean, that's a really young team. They probably have the best stable of prospects from a future NHL value perspective, but they're going to have a tough time just holding their own given the ages of some of the other teams at this tournament. So really important to be aware of that, right? This is sort of like a mix of young pros, guys that just graduated from college, some ECHL pros, but also guys that are going to spend the year in junior, and that sort of muddies our evaluation. So what do I expect from Lekaramaki? Well, on that line, I expect it to be real good.
Thomas, so look ahead to main training camp for me, and who out of this bunch in Penticton do you think could make the Canucks really think about, going in to Canuck camp and stealing a spot?
Yeah, it's really tough, Rick, right? Because this Canucks team's invested so much in terms of bodies on the wing, right? And all of the names that I'd like to tell you are worth watching are on the wing, right? Like you think about Lekaramaki, right? You never want to put a ceiling on a player who did what he did as a 19-year-old in the SHL and the World Juniors, right? I mean, there's a chance that Lekaramaki comes in and just blows the door off and can't possibly be left off this team. But, you know, this team already moved a pretty interesting winger in Vasily Podkolzin a few weeks ago, in part because they were like, man, he's going to be in tough to be one of our 13 best wingers or 13 best forwards. You know, you bring in Sherwood, Heinen, you bring in DeBrusque, obviously. You bring in Daniel Sprong, right? And all of a sudden it's going to get pretty crowded. So, you know, I won't be surprised if Arshdeep Bains, for example, makes a pretty credible assault on breaking camp with the team, you know, once we're sort of into main camp next week in Penticton. But, you know, it's awfully tough. Like, it's awfully tough to dislodge, you know, an Amon or a Sprong or, you know, one of those, or a Sherwood or one of those players sort of penciled in to fourth line or bottom six roles. It's a really high bar that a Bains or a Lekaramaki type, a Lekermaki, excuse me, are going to have to sort of leap over if they're going to break camp with this team. It's hard, man. Like, it's hard to win a job at an NHL training camp these days. It's going to be especially tough given that, you know, all of the most credible challengers play the position that the Canucks spent the entire summer sort of bolstering and deepening with their various moves.
All right, Thomas, let's look at the main group of Canucks. The big story is, look, camp starts next Thursday. Demko going to be there? Are they looking for a backup? How is Silovs doing? What's your read on the goalie situation?
Yeah, you know, information's been a little bit scant. We're going to have to wait and see. You know, Demko's going to be there, I'm sure, whether he's skating with the main group right away or working off to the side or just progressing. I mean, we'll have to wait. Like, we're going to have to wait and see there. Silovs, you know, sort of similarly, although there's obviously a little bit less concern there. You know, the state of Canucks goaltending, I think the way to look at it is just that it sort of introduces some uncertainty into what we should look at or sort of expect from this team in the early part of the season, you know, both into training camp and potentially to start the year. All of that said, you know, when I think about what this Canucks team did this summer, when I think about their position relative to the other Western Conference contenders, right, most of whom are getting older, have an older core group, right, a core group that might be a little bit more likely to take a step back in terms of their overall quality than Vancouver's group of best players. When I look at, you know, some of the key departures from Vegas, you know, from Dallas, from some of the other best teams in the West, like, yeah, the Canucks lost Lindholm and Zadorov, and I don't mean to downplay that, but I think you could say that other teams lost more. You know, I sort of look at this team on paper, and whether or not I think they're vastly improved, I think you'd say they at least ran in place with maybe a little bit of fragility in terms of the puck moving on the back end and the goaltending and maybe the center depth as well, right? Like, those are sort of the three spots of uncertainty that we'll be monitoring, I suppose, as training camp unfolds and as the season begins. But, you know, when you run in place with a younger group, when other teams lose more than you did, you know, that whether you're better on paper than the team we saw in the playoffs last spring or not, you know, your positioning relative to your competitors in the Western Conference is strengthened. And I sort of think that's where the Canucks are at as we enter this season. It's going to be tough for them to run as purely as they did last year, but I do think that this is a team that can, you know, sustain and overcome, you know, perhaps some performances or some regression or running a little bit less pure from a shooting efficiency perspective than they did last season, just with the sort of robustness of their defensive game and their overall talent level up and down the roster. For me, really, the goaltending situation, we'll have to watch to see how it sorts out. More than anything, it just introduces a little bit of uncertainty, maybe a little bit of fragility into how we're evaluating this team in advance of the 2024-25 campaign. What's your best guess, Thomas, when it comes to Brock Boeser's future in Vancouver? 1 year left on his deal. Yeah, I mean, pretty interesting. Like, I think the club was pretty upfront about their desire to not prioritize getting an extension done this summer, like right off the bat when the season ended. You know, talks were, as Rick and I have reported a couple of times, non-existent, basically, during the summer. You know, I do think given sort of the various ups and downs that relationship has had over the course of Brock's career, like I do think the player has found a home in Vancouver. Like I do think he's happy in Vancouver. I'm sure his preference would be to stay. And look at his minutes. I mean, this club leans on Boeser extremely heavily in matchup minutes. Number one, he's often this team's leading, ice time guy, 5-on-5 among all forwards. So, that tells you what they think of him. Coming off that 40-goal season, he'd never hit 30 before. You can understand maybe some trepidation and sort of buying high on the organization's perspective. Maybe it makes sense to let the sample pool and sort of figure out a more like middle ground platform year off which to have extension talks off of. But this team spent a lot of time. They spent a lot of cap space. They brought in some interesting bodies to bolster their wing depth. And yet I think we enter the season, or we should be entering the season pretty confident that Boeser's their best winger still, right? That's an important piece for this team, especially given that, he's one of this team's really reliable sources of offense. And as we saw in the playoffs, like that's something this team needs to prioritize and preserve desperately. So, it'll sort itself out, but I see no reason for the Canucks to move on from Boeser. And I'd be shocked if Boeser had any inclination not to make Vancouver his first choice too. So that the shape of that would tell me that, I'd expect at some point the two sides get together and hammer this thing out, but certainly we'll see. Lots of time before July 1, 2025.
Thomas, thanks for this. Make sure you make your way over to Memorial Arena, the old Memorial Arena, which is right next to the South Okanagan Event Center. They still play games there, but it's like a museum. It's just so well preserved there. But thanks so much for this.
Yeah, and I'll check out the BC Hockey Hall of Fame as well, of course. Always like to take a gander when I'm up in Lake Country. Thanks, boys. Be well.
You bet.